If you've ever watched a crime show like CSI and thought, that looks like the most interesting and intriguing job ever, today's episode is for you. If you have ever wondered what it is really like to work in and process crime scenes, today's guests will answer all your questions. With decades of experience in the field, Anndee Kendrick can give you a realistic look behind the yellow tape. We will discuss everything from the emotional toll of working at tragic scenes to the unexpected challenges. Whether you're a criminal justice student, a true crime fan, or just curious about what it takes to be on the front lines of justice, stick around. You won't want to miss this episode. I'm honored to introduce today's guest, Anndee Kendrick. She's been working in the field of forensic investigations for multiple decades. I've had the pleasure of working with her, and recently we've been working together to create curriculum for a new crime scene investigations bachelor's degree at Polk State College. I look forward to diving into the realities of crime scene investigations. Welcome, Anndee. I think it would be best for us to start today's conversation by you giving our listeners a little bit of your background and your experience.
Okay. I went to the University of South Florida, and that's where I got my bachelor's degree in criminal justice. So graduated from USF, started my career here at the sheriff's office in communications. Worked there for a little bit over 4 years. And while I was doing that, I was doing ride-alongs while I could with crime scene investigators. I was going to deputy training as much as I could to try to get my foot in the door and to get a feel for the career to make sure it's truly what I wanted to go into. When I graduated from college, I wasn't exactly sure what in the field of criminal justice that I wanted to go into. So I finally got into crime scene after multiple tries. And once I started doing that, I realized that I probably needed to go after a master's degree at some point to further myself. So I went to St. Leo University while I was working full time and had kids, family, all of that going on, and got my master's degree with a concentration in forensic science. I was promoted as a supervisor in crime scene in 2006, and then I became the administrator, which is the equivalent of a lieutenant in crime scene in 2017. That's where I still currently am doing.
So, with all of those years of experience, I'm sure that you've seen that there has been more recently interest in crime scene and the forensics field, and that was kind of shaped by these television shows like CSI and even some of the police shows that have come about. So, how has television shaped the public's perception of what you do? And then what are the biggest misconceptions people have about crime scene investigations because of those shows?
It's funny when those shows first started. So the first one was CSI Las Vegas. We actually, as part of our training, watched some of those shows to see what the public was being exposed to. I've actually been followed on crime scenes before and was told, I saw this on CSI. I know you can get a fingerprint off of this, or I know you can do this. And so some of the processes that they show on TV are correct in what we do, but it's dramatized. We do use Blue Star or luminol to search scenes for hidden blood, but we're not going to do it in broad daylight. Blue Star is a little more advanced than luminol, so we just need, we can have a little bit of ambient light. We don't have to have it completely pitch black, but you're not going to go out on a hotel balcony in broad daylight sunlight and search for hidden blood and get a reaction. So they dramatize the process to make it more appealing to the audience. The time frame is also incorrect. So I can't just take a fingerprint card and scan it into a computer, and 2 seconds later, it's going to spit out a name of a suspect for me. Computers have sped up that process, but it's not going to be that quick. And a person has to sit there and look at it in order to make an identification on that card. They think from these TVs that we're always going to get a fingerprint or we're always going to get DNA. And we've seen a shift to where juries are expecting to get that type of evidence every case that we get. And that's just not true. We don't always get fingerprints. From watching these TV shows, people have learned to wear gloves and wear masks so that they don't spread that type of evidence. So that's kind of the shift from the TV shows that we've seen in the field.
With your decades of experience, how have you managed the emotional toll of working at sometimes intense and often tragic crime scenes?
So you have to have a good support base, be it your work family, because I do consider the people that I work with a family because we can be each other's sounding board so that if we do have an emotional traumatic scene, we can talk amongst ourselves and talk it out. Because typically you don't want to go home to somebody that's not involved in the law enforcement field and burden them with things that you've seen that no person should ever truly see. It's good to have a work group that you can kind of vent to that know exactly what you're going through and can sympathize and you could talk it out with. It also helps that my husband worked in law enforcement, so I can always depend on him. If I've had a traumatic emotional scene, I can go home and just vent to him and talk it out. And he's like my safe zone that I can talk to and know that he's going to talk me through it. We also have to be able to compartmentalize. So you have to look at the big picture, document that scene, and collect that evidence that eventually will help to see that somebody is held accountable for what happened at that scene. So you have to be able to shift the motions to later so that you can do your best performance at the job to get through it.
So you just mentioned talking, compartmentalizing. Are there any other strategies to cope with stress or the emotional weight of the job?
Like you said, we talk things out. And the other thing that works for me is to have some kind of a hobby. Binging on Netflix and watching the crime shows, that's not a hobby. But sometimes just zoning out to those shows will help you do that. For me, it's walking and hiking. I can get out in nature, and usually my husband's with me. So we might spend about 5 minutes of the walk or hike talking about work stuff. But then we both kind of kick into, okay, that's enough of work. We're going to leave that behind, talk about something else. But we're out, we're active, and doing something outside helps me deal with some of that as well. I do it on the treadmill if I absolutely have to, but it's usually better for me if I'm outside walking, hiking somewhere with him to where I can get my mind off of whatever has happened, whatever trauma or anything that I've seen.
Beyond visually, what other physical aspects are a reality of these crime scenes?
So, smells are definitely a big reality that most people might not think about when they're going into this, but it's definitely something you have to consider how you deal with smells. I've always found that I have to go into scenes like that with having eaten. I can't go into it with an empty stomach in order to handle the smells. So anytime I go to an autopsy or I know that I'm going to a death that involves decomposition, I have to have eaten something first in order for me to be able to handle the smells that I know are going to come my way. Weather is also a factor for us that we know we have to handle because we're out in all kinds of conditions. Heat, of course, here in Florida is a big factor. We have to make sure we're staying hydrated. We're taking breaks often to get some water in us so that we're just not sweating and getting overheated. Cold every once in a while is an issue for us that we'll have to deal with, but typically it's very short term here in Florida. I have had a scene where it was extremely cold. We are all wearing our jackets and had stuff on our heads, but we would go on to our major scene van and we had the heater going and we actually had a light in there too that we would all just put our hands over, go stand in there for a few minutes, go back outside in the cold to do what we needed to do and keep going back and forth. Evidence with the weather can also come into play. So if we have shoe and tire impression evidence that we're dealing with and it's cold, in order for that to dry, we're going to probably have to do something else because otherwise we could be out there for 2 hours waiting for a plaster cast to dry. So we might have to have a car hover over the impression so that the heat from the undercarriage helps us make that dry a little bit faster. Or if it's rainy, we have to make some kind of cover to put over that evidence so it doesn't wash away and we've lost that evidence. Dangerous conditions are something that we also have to think about, because most of us here in the state of Florida are not sworn employees. So we don't wear vests, we don't have guns. So if it's a dangerous situation, we have to be escorted by a law enforcement officer, but we still have to be mindful of what's happening around us because things can happen. And so you have to be aware of your surroundings and realize that there is some danger to what we are doing. That's one of the reasons that in the state of Florida, we get high risk retirement, not only because of the biohazards that we can be exposed to, but because of the dangerous condition.
So I think we addressed some of those downfalls or unexpected challenges. Did you want to address working long hours or any of the weather that might contaminate, like sweat contaminating evidence?
Absolutely. So we have to be aware of sweating and us possibly contaminating evidence when we are collecting it. I know a lot of us wear multiple pairs of gloves, but then you have the sweat that can drip down your arms. So you have to be mindful of when you're collecting DNA, not to add yourself to the evidence. So you have sweat dripping down your face, you need to make sure before you're doing your DNA, you've wiped it so you're not adding to it. You don't have sweat dripping down your arms that can get into a blood drop as you're collecting it, things like that. This is a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week job. So there's times that you're going to miss out on things with your family. You're not always going to be able to be off on the holidays when you have family in town. Holidays can be celebrated other days, but some families aren't always able to do that. There's been times where I haven't been able to go on field trips with my kids or be with them for their whole birthday because of being on call for work or something major is going on. There's been times when I've been out working on a scene for over 24 hours. So I didn't get to put my kids to bed. I didn't get to read them a good night story. So it's those things you have to keep in mind, that it's a great job. I enjoy it, but there are downfalls to it that you have to think about. You have to have supportive family members. My husband and I, for a lot of years, we did opposite shifts so that one of us could be available to be with the kids, because there are kids. I'm not going to burden my parents or his parents with trying to raise them. They've helped us, but at the end of the day, it's our responsibility for the kids and to make sure they're taken care of. And in order for us to both be where we wanted to be in our careers, is one of us would be on day shift, one of us will be on night shift, in order to do what we do with our careers.
Can you walk us through the chain of command when a crime scene is processed and how you work with law enforcement detectives?
When we become a crime scene investigator, we go through all this training. So ultimately, what gets collected, processed, rests on the crime scene investigator, but we work at the direction of the detective or the deputies. As I mentioned before, we are not sworn, so we are not the ones doing the questioning, interrogation, anything like that. So what typically happens is the detective or deputy will pass along information to us that lets us know what we need to document, what we need to collect, what we need to process based off of those interviews and interrogations. So we work hand in hand with them to do what we do at scenes. Now, if it's a major scene, a supervisor or I will also be there. And we will be connecting with the detectives, with the supervision that's there. So on major scenes, typically we will have like a homicide sergeant, lieutenant, captain, majors. They might all be there. But most of the time, we, as the supervisor, are getting the information from them, and then we're passing it along to our team so that they know how to process that scene. So we always work in connection with law enforcement at those scenes. But at the end of the day, if something doesn't get collected or processed, that would be on the shoulders of the crime scene. But we work hand in hand with law enforcement in these scenes.
What about state attorney's office? In Florida, we have state attorney's office, but in other jurisdictions, they have district attorneys that our listeners might have seen, on Law and Order and all of that. So do you work with the state attorney at any point in time, or?
Yes. At the beginning, the state attorney's office or prosecutor might not be involved, but they become involved. So they might decide later, hey, you collected this gun and nobody processed it for prints. And so they'll do a latent print work order or request for us to get DNA. Then we would do that then. If it's a major call like a homicide, an officer involved shooting, A lot of times somebody from the state attorney's office will come to that scene so they can see it firsthand. And they help the detectives with writing search warrants and all of that, but they actually will walk through the scene with us. We'll show them what we've had so far. And then they might say, hey, can you make sure that you do this or that? And then when it comes time for court to roll around, we typically will meet with them beforehand and we'll go through our photographs. We might have met them at property and evidence, and sometimes that's with defense attorneys as well, that we will go through all of the evidence and determine what we're going to use in court or not use. Before court happens, a lot of the attorneys will give us a list of questions so that we can know what we're going to be asked. You never know from the defense attorney what you're going to get asked, but usually with the state, they'll provide us with a list of questions. So it is something that we work hand in hand with also the state attorney's office when we work these calls.
You mentioned your degrees, your college degrees, your master's degrees. What other kind of training certificates are required for your profession? And how has that training and certifications and having college degrees evolved since you started?
So with the sheriff's office, when we have an open position, we look in-house first. You have to have your foot in the door somewhere at the sheriff's office, and then you interview to be in crime scene, which is now called forensics. I started at the communications. That's how I got my foot in the door here. So with that, you just have to have the high school diploma. Once you come into crime scene or forensics, then you go through 18 to 22 weeks of training. We're starting at ground zero because a lot of the times, if you've had college classes, you're reading about in the books about how to do stuff, but you've never actually held a camera in your hand to know, okay, how do I change an f-stop? How do I change a shutter speed? So that's what happens during that 18 to 22 weeks of training. The first 6 weeks, you're in the office. You're learning how to work the camera, how to change the f-stop, how to change shutter speed, what you need to change in order to take photographs, what type of photographs that you need to take. You learn how to process for fingerprints and how to lift prints, how to collect evidence, how to package it, how to write the reports. Then the second 6 weeks, you are shadowing a person that works in the field. That other person is responsible for the calls, but you as the trainee are taking pretend photographs, you're collecting pretend evidence, you're writing pretend report. And then the next 6 weeks, the trainee becomes responsible for the call with the investigator shadowing them. They're making sure that everything is collected, everything is processed, everything gets transferred into the report. And then the last 2 weeks, a supervisor or I will shadow them to make sure that they are ready to be released, that they can work the calls. Now, after that training happens, we also send people off to different classes throughout their career. So they go through a crime scene reconstruction class, which kind of hits on a little bit of everything that we do, the photography, the processing, bloodstain documentation, shooting reconstruction, and how to document shooting scenes. Then we also have 40-hour classes that kind of delve a little bit more into those areas of bloodstain documentation and shooting reconstruction. There's different photography classes that we've sent people to. There's buried bones and surface skeletons classes that we go to. So there's also a certification that you can get through the International Association for Identification. There's different levels. There's a basic level, there's an analyst level, and then there's a third level. So you have different textbooks that you take a written exam from, but there's also classes that you have to take during the time frame when you're going for the certification that will count towards that. It can involve courtroom testimony and things like that. So some agencies will require you to have that certification. And even some agencies here in the state of Florida are requiring people to have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree in order to work in this field. Where I work at Polk County, we don't. If you want to get promoted to the position of supervisor or my position, that's where your degree comes into play. You have to have a degree in order to get that promotion. But ground level, you just have to have the high school diploma.
Do you normally choose candidates that may have that degree over a candidate that doesn't have a degree if y'all are looking in-house?
I absolutely do. That's one of the things that I do look at when we're going through our interview process, because I have to think ahead to the future. So I'm getting towards the end of my career. I'll hit my 30 years next year and I can go into our drop program to where it'll probably be maybe 5 years that I have left after that. So thinking ahead to the future, I want to create a pool of people here that can be chosen from to be promoted when I leave. So we're going to have then a supervisor's position and then my position so that I can have that pool for staff to choose from. They can interview and decide who the best person would be. So I definitely look for people that have those degrees. And those would be one of, my top choices when I'm looking for a candidate as an investigator.
How important is documentation and report writing in your job, and how detailed do they need to be, those reports?
Very, very detailed. You have to be a detail-oriented person in this career. You can't be one of these people who gets easily distracted. And these scenes, we have to have some type of system to work it. So you can't just go off and be, oh, I'll take a photograph over here, or I'll take a photograph over here. You have to be detail oriented and be able to pay attention to those details. With our reports, the devil is in the details. You have to transfer what you see into those reports because that's what everything's going to be based off of later. The attorneys are going to be reading these reports when you testify in court. That's where your testimony is going to come from. Yes, you're going to present your photographs and your evidence, but you have details in your report that you need to be able to tell the judge and the jury what you saw at these different scenes. So we have to take detailed notes to transfer that in there. You don't want to be sitting on the stand when it comes time for court and you're like, oh my gosh, I forgot to talk about that. Maybe you smelled alcohol at the scene that was important, that you didn't transfer that into your report, or, oh, I forgot to list all these measurements that I got. Hopefully, if your supervisor reads your report, that would be something that would be caught because we'd be like, hey, why didn't you do measurements at the scene? And that would kind of trigger it. But the devil is definitely in the details. We're not writing the great American novel, but we need to be able to put all of the details from the scene into these reports.
So, talking about the reports and having to testify in court, I talk to a lot of students and they don't understand or they didn't really think about having to testify in court when these cases go to trial. So, how do you prepare for that? Is there anything about the courtroom and testifying that you find challenging?
Definitely review your reports, your photographs, go over your evidence. It's always a great idea to meet with the attorney prior to trial so you can get that list of questions that they're going to ask you so you know what's coming. If it's a very long report for me, what I like to do is go through and highlight in my report what I know that they're probably going to ask me about. And I'll read over it again and again and again the whole time while typically I'm sitting outside waiting to be called into the courtroom. I'm going over my report. There's no way that we can memorize every little detail in the report because there is so much information that we typically put in them. But, like dates and times and basic things, I do try to memorize that so that I'm not constantly having to refer to my report. I have never had a judge say that I can't refer to my report. I just typically say, do you mind if I refer, or may I refer to my report for this question? And I'll go through and look at that. Reading over it, meeting with the attorney, looking at your photographs with them so you know exactly which photographs they're going to introduce. I did have a case one time, I think it was an attempted homicide, and the attorney didn't show me the photographs before I went in to testify. And the only ones that he introduced were close-up photographs of casings that I had collected on a tile floor in a kitchen. I had marker numbers with each casing, but I didn't get to see in the close-ups. None of those had the marker number there. It was just zoomed in on the casing itself. So the defense attorney said, well, where was this casing in the kitchen? And I said, from these photos, I can't tell because it's a close-up photograph. If I would have had my evidence establishing or mid-range photograph that I'd taken before the close-up, I could have done that. But I just had to say, they all came from the kitchen floor. From these photos, I can't tell which casing is which. So definitely going and meeting with the attorney ahead of time is a great idea, and asking to see those photographs. That was earlier in my career, so I didn't know as much as I do now about trying to request those meetings to be more prepared. Also, getting more comfortable with public speaking would be great to prepare you to go into a courtroom. So I was more shy and quiet earlier in my career. And so that was a hurdle I had to overcome, is going and speaking in front of people would scare me to death. When I was younger, if I sang sometimes, I would hold stuff in front of my face so that people couldn't look at me while I was singing, that I was that shy. So I kind of had to put myself in more situations which required public speaking. So I would volunteer to teach the new deputies that came in, because that typically would put me in front of a group of, 5 to 10 people. Then I started doing more presentations at work, going to schools and doing demonstrations before I started teaching in the classroom. So I tried to do that to make myself more comfortable when speaking in public, because you're sitting in that chair by the judge. And when you're speaking in front of a jury, so you have however many jury members there are, plus the attorneys, plus the judge, and then you have whatever audience that they might have allowed in the courtroom. So you might only have one or two people there, or there's times when you have a full courtroom. If it's a homicide trial, a lot of people like to come and watch those. It might be family members for the defendants, or members of the press, or victims' family members. You never know how many people are going to be in there. So definitely doing more public speaking and becoming more comfortable with that will make you more comfortable to testify in court.
Have you ever felt pressured to complete one of your reports quickly? And how do you balance that need for speed with the need for accuracy?
So yes, there is pressure. A lot of times with our reports, we'll have deadlines based on things the state attorney's office needs. So if it's a juvenile case, those reports have to get done very quickly. If it's an adult, usually it's 21 days to get the things done. On a homicide case, it wouldn't be unusual for us to have, 200 items of evidence. Well, that's going to take time for us to process and to package and enter into our report writing system, because we have to do all of that ahead of writing the report. So I try to have conversations with the detectives or their supervision. Okay, what exactly do you need from us for the state attorney's office at this point? Because I can maybe get some of that done and do a quick supplement, but there's no way that I'm going to be able to get this whole report done for this homicide case with this time frame that you're giving me now. It's just not going to happen. Perfect example is the quadruple homicide that we had a couple years ago that we're still waiting to come to trial. That report, for me, as the supervision, I did a lot of the bullet hole documentation on that one. That took me over a month just to write the report. That's not counting me entering evidence and stuff that I collected there. It took me over a month to sit there and write that report. So if they had given me a deadline on that, I tried to just do it in different increments. Okay, I'll give you this by this date, this by this date.
Can you share one of the most interesting or challenging cases you've worked on?
The challenging ones for most of us involve kids or animals. One of my more challenging ones was a homicide where a whole family was killed. The dad killed mom, 2 kids, tried to kill a third child, and then killed himself. That was one of the challenging scenes for me. When we got there, all of the victims were covered with sheets, which is sometimes happens, sometimes doesn't. But you know that there is a kid and a baby under those sheets, but until you lift up the sheet during your documentation, you don't know what to expect. That was a more challenging scene for us to go through, because the mom had the baby. The baby was under a year old in a car seat. She was trying to leave the situation to de-escalate, to get away from him. And he chased after her, shot the baby, shot another child, tried to shoot the third child, who managed to get away, and then ended up shooting himself. That was definitely one of the more challenging scenes, more on the emotional side than anything else. Documentation, we didn't change anything with that, but it was a challenge on the emotion side to get through, just because you knew what was under the sheet, but once you lifted it, then how are you going to process that? So I'd have to say that call was one of my more challenging ones.
Have you ever come across a crime scene that kind of defied what you thought was typical?
That's a good one. I don't think there's truly a typical. I think everyone is a little bit different. There's always going to be something that's a little different at each and every one. Some of the more memorable ones that were just a little different than others, we had a fire death that we were working, and we had one victim that we know of. And during our documentation, we were looking in a closet, and it looked like there was a second victim in there because we could see a leg. And we're like, well, the fire department didn't mention anything about a second victim. And then it ended up being a prosthetic leg that was in the closet. But with everything being so dark from the fire, and it just was hard to see for sure that it was a prosthetic leg and not a real person that was in the closet. So that was kind of a, whoa, what is this? We didn't expect to see that in the closet. Another thing that was unusual is that we had a murder suicide that we were working. And when we work those scenes, we try to figure out, how many times each victim was shot. So how many projectiles, how many casings should we be looking for? And we were missing one or two projectiles. And we were like, where could these have gone? I had moved the refrigerator out from the wall, standing on the countertops, looking on top of the cabinets, looking through everything, gone through all these baskets of laundry, trying to find it. We tore this house apart, I thought, and couldn't find this projectile. Well, later the detective got called because when they were cleaning things up, it ended up being in a toaster. So that kind of has changed some of the ways that I search scenes. Now, anytime I have a shooting that's near a kitchen, I'm always picking up that toaster and I'm shaking it and making sure that there's no projectile that's in there, because that was kind of a surprise in that one. And people hide things in just different places that you wouldn't normally think of. I had a death investigation, and for some reason, this lady had put all of her prescription medication in a dryer. So that's something else that I'll check now. Even on just normal death investigations, I'll go and I'll look in the washer and dryer just to make sure there's no prescription medication that might be in there. We found some weird things in ovens that you're like, okay, why are you putting this in an oven? But you just have to be thorough in these searches. So that's some of the unusual things that we've come across while we work some of these scenes.
Do you have any advice to give to someone considering a career in crime scene?
I would definitely advise doing ride-alongs or internships if your college lets you do that as part of your credit, or asking to do it besides that, until you go out in the field and see what the job entails. You're not going to know for sure that this is what you want to do. That helped me tremendously because I was able to do the ride-alongs. I was able to go to an autopsy before I started doing this, because I've had trainees that get to a certain point of their training, and then we're doing some of these autopsies and they're like, I've decided this is not for me. I can't take this. I'm not built for this. And they've transferred back to someplace else in the agency. So definitely getting your foot in the door someplace so that you're getting exposed to what the job truly is. And it's okay if you're not meant for the field work. There's other places with a forensic background that you can go into. There's, lab positions that you can go into where you're not dealing with the field work. But you've got to see that that's something that you truly want to do.
Yeah, and you mentioned that they need to get their foot in at a door at an agency. Like, we're not seeing a lot of forensics or crime scene positions posted on like job boards or opening positions. It's normally posted in-house. So I have always told students, if they're interested, ride along is number one. And number two is to get your foot in the door at an agency, whether it's answering the phones, working in human resources like you did, working as a dispatcher, some way to get your foot in the door.
Correct. One of my people is leaving in October. So we'll have an opening, and that's the first thing that will happen, is that we will open it up in here. And I do have some people that have done ride-alongs and stuff, so I'm hoping that they put in for that position. I know, like the Winter Haven Police Department, they are going to have an opening, I think, in October. I think they've already posted their position. So every once in a while that'll happen, but definitely having your foot in the doors, like you said, answering phones, being at the front desk here at the sheriff's office. I know the one of the people that's done the ride along, she's working in property and evidence, and that would definitely be a good place to get your foot in the door, because then you're seeing how the evidence should be packaged, how to enter it in, and dealing with that end of it. So you kind of have an edge because you know that end of it once you come into the forensics position.
Just one more question. How do you see the field evolving over the next decade? And are there any technologies that you're super excited about?
So I think we're all watching AI to see how that's going to change our fields. I think that is one that I'm definitely keeping an eye on to see what it's going to do in the forensic world. One of the people that I follow, I watch his YouTube videos. He talks about, it's called Shot Spotter, that they're using AI to deal with when they have gunshots. Was it really a gunshot that went off? And somehow they're using AI to help with that. So I think that's something that's going to change the field that we need to keep an eye out for to see, is it something we could truly use, or is it going to be a flash in the pan kind of a thing? DNA is going to continue to evolve. Now we're using skin cells to be able to do that, but I think it's going to be even more than that. So I don't think DNA is at the end of where it's going to be. So for sure, DNA will be a big thing that's going to continue to change in the field that we need to keep an eye on and keep up with that technology. And that's just the big thing, is we have to keep up with the technology to know what's out there and what we can do with it that's going to help us do our job better. Drones are also something that I'm excited to use, because when those first came out, the way that the law was written in the state of Florida, we couldn't use drones to do crime scene documentation. They could do to go in to search for people and that, but we couldn't use it for crime scene documentation. Well, now that's changed. So I think drone use is going to continue to evolve with us in the forensic world as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking time out today to give us a little background and some more realistic looks at your profession. I appreciate you, and I look forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
As we wrap up today's episode, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk to you about Polk State College's online Bachelor's of Science in Criminal Justice with a concentration in crime scene investigations. We are super excited for this new program, and even more ecstatic that Anndee Kendrick is the lead professor for this concentration. So check out the following video, which will give you more information about our program, and reach out if you have any questions or want to get started. And this is the Criminal Justice Professor, and I'm signing out. Have a great day.
Welcome to the Center for Public Safety. My name is Kristen Shea, and I am the Program Director for the Criminal Justice Programs at Polk State College.
My name is Anndee Kendrick. I am an adjunct professor, and I teach the crime scene related courses.
We created a murder box as an interactive online lab for our crime scene courses. So you can imagine, how can I really learn about doing crime scene investigations if I'm sitting at home? Basically, it is a box that the student is sent in the mail or they pick up from us at the beginning of the semester.
This is what you get when you do the crime scene investigations program. You get a murder box. Basically, it is kind of everything you would use to process a real life crime scene. Week 1, we were doing DNA collection. Week 2, we were learning about blood stains. And then it tells you if there's a week that you don't use the murder box. Some of the things that we have in the murder box: caliper to measure blood stains in millimeters. We have evidence cards, the lifts for fingerprints.
They have to have a webcam or a cell phone to film themselves doing the activities. They're given the scenario ahead of time. They upload their video and the professor provides feedback.
To create the scenes that the students work and the murder boxes, I've kind of built off of my career at the sheriff's office and some of the cases in real life that I've worked. The kids are using the items that we would use in the field to obtain DNA, to process for fingerprints.
So we've gotten really good at trying to bring real world cases and scenarios on their screens from home. Having the online component and the use of the murder box gives them more than just that academic knowledge. It gives them some hands-on experience as well. We are here today to discuss our brand new online bachelor's degree in criminal justice with a concentration in crime scene investigations.
I would have to say that I chose Polk State College because my kind of undergraduate college, I guess you could say HCC, Hillsborough Community College, they offered associate degrees in criminology and criminal justice. And then I knew that I wanted to, kind of go higher and get a bachelor's degree.
Our online program is very popular because it allows students to get that education from the comforts of their home.
Doing it online, I was kind of skeptical at first, like, whoa, how is this going to work? First and foremost, the instructors are wonderful. They have the experience, they have the credentials. I can see in the lessons and the assignments, they draw from there. You have everything you need to succeed. It has practical labs. It has assignments, it has real life scenarios, and I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything per se just because it's online.
I would recommend for students that are looking for the criminal justice field to come to Polk State. There's very few programs that I've encountered where it's not just a textbook or a video that students are watching. These are built off of real world cases that they might encounter once they get into a career.
I would recommend Polk State Criminal Justice Crime Scene Investigations program to other students because it's very comprehensive. You can tell that it was very well thought out. The correct professors were selected. The material is very engaging, and I feel like I would be able to do quite a few of the things that I've learned in a real world scenario.
No matter what field you're working in, criminal investigations and evidence collection is paramount. Agencies spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to send their employees to the training that you're getting right here at Polk State College.